Hi, welcome to video number 3 on our GBL mini course. This video is called the GBL learning process. So here's a question. What's the difference between game-based learning and just playing a game? The difference is when you're just playing a game, there is no process and there will be no learning. So it's kind of obvious to say it, but a lot of people miss that point. Unless you have a structured learning process when you engage teams and individuals with games, then they might have great fun, but it's hit and miss whether they'll actually learn anything. So let's look at the game-based learning process we've developed over a number of years, and it's fairly generic. Before we do that, I just want to give you a flavor for what a typical team GBL session looks like. So we're going to play a little bit of a client video, and as you watch it, there's different things to look out for, and you won't see them all. But first of all, the game needs to be set up. The people need to be in the right frame of mind. It needs to be launched, not as a game, but as an important business learning event. The teams need to be established, and you need to decide on how you compose those teams. A game will typically have 3 or 4 rounds. It will be facilitated. There might even be 1 facilitator per team, depending on the number of teams. There will be time for reflection, because without reflection, people learning is very, very surface. And finally, there needs to be some closeout. So let's just give you a little flavor here of what a session might look like. Okay, I think that gives you the gist of it, the kind of mood and the atmosphere when you're in a typical team game-based learning session. So let's look at this process we've developed, and at a high level, I call it the IWEI Sandwich. And what that means is at the start, you're engaging with the people as individuals, and then when you put them into teams, they become a team. And actually the learning is predominantly as teams, but you can't end the session like that, or they don't go away with things they can take back to the business. You need to bring them back to I again. So this is the I part of the sandwich, and most importantly at the start, before people play anything, you need to engage them in thinking about what is it they want to learn. And we've talked in an earlier video about the different modes of learning, the planned learning and the shared learning and the serendipitous learning. And also you can get them to think about the different dimensions of learning. What do they want to learn about the topic? What do they want to learn about team dynamics? What do they want to learn about in terms of their own style? And what techniques might they be interested in learning about? So the more you can engage with them at the start, the better. I like to do it incrementally because they will think of things as they get into the session as well. But experiential learning is not for spectators. People need to have some idea what they're coming to take away with, or they won't be disappointed. They'll take away very little. Then we go into this process, which looks a bit complicated, but is really quite straightforward. So we constitute the teams, and then we brief the teams on what the challenge is. Then I'd like to do this session called mental models. A mental model guides how you behave. It's something that I discovered in Peter Senge's writing. And there's 2 types of mental model. There's your espoused mental model, which is what you think you believe, and there's your in-use mental model. One of the best examples of mental model is skidding on ice. My espoused mental model was to turn into the skid, but actually the first time I did it, I fought the skid and it didn't work out that well. So that's great because you let people start to think about what they already know. I'm not one for a one-size-fits-all type of learning. Learning needs to be personalized. And a great way to surface mental models is have people draw cause and effect diagrams. If we do this in life or in the business, if we put up price, this is what we think will happen. and then people can see the gaps in their knowledge, and that gets them conditioned to fill those gaps during the learning. So now people have thought about what they want to learn and their mental models. We then need to form them into teams. Very important they form a team and they don't just start just because they're all sitting together. What's the roles they're going to play? What's going to be their strategy? How are they going to engage with each other? The normal stuff about building a team. And I have a little checklist called Rapport that's in the book that's very useful about rapidly building a team to do some activity. The teams start off, they have their discussions about what decisions they're going to make. Typically there's a facilitator watching as well, and the facilitator will talk a little more later in the series about good and bad things a facilitator should consider doing and not doing. Finally, the team come to an end of their decisions, or they normally time out, and they write their decisions down, and then they put them into the simulation. They see the results, they get the results back. Typically, they learn a little bit about the difference between leading and lagging indicators in terms of what's a warning of something happening and what means the car crash has already happened. Then, at the end of each round, they do two things. We have what I call a learning board, where we try to get them to capture insights. Very important people capture insights as they go along because they will forget them. And we have then a leaderboard where we create a bit of fun and a bit of competition by showing how the teams are all competing against each other. Because in the real world, there is competition. And we can play with that. Sometimes we can start the teams competing, and in the middle of the game, it turns out the teams are all part of the same organization. But competition, in my opinion, is usually a pretty essential ingredient of a game-based learning session. Then that's one round. You go round that 3 or 4 times, following the same process. New updates for quarter 2. The market's changed. You might be moving people between teams, and you carry on and you go round that. So you get to the end of the WE learning, and then you need to close it out. And often the WE learning is closed out by the team doing a short presentation of their insights. What would they do if they did this again? What would they do differently? And what were they particularly pleased about in terms of how they behaved? Then you need to bring the people back as individuals and what I call the personal learning commitments. What have I learned? What difference would this make to my job? Ideally, what difference would this make to my key performance indicators? And what commitments am I going to make back at the ranch about putting in this behavior? Now, we'll talk also later about keeping learning alive after a learning event. So that's the basic model, the IWEI sandwich, which is vital around making sure that people learn from game-based learning and don't just have a great time. They will have a great time, but we want them to learn as well. And the model is described in a lot more detail in the book on game-based learning. So that's all I wanted to say about that. In the next topic, we'll go into the interesting area of evaluating game-based learning technologies and trying to avoid getting hypnotized by what the technology can do and asking the question instead, what is it we want?